Hello, everyone. I'm Augie Napoli, President and CEO of the United Way of Greater Cleveland.
I'm Danielle Sidnor, President of the Cleveland branch of the NAACP. Together, we are honored to present to the community this series of community conversations on the Cleveland Consent Decree. Each session will focus on an area of the consent decree and police reform through a conversation among experts and community leaders to provide insight and to re-engage the community.
The objective of these conversations is to provide a forum to raise awareness and increase community engagement on the consent decree and how it affects members of our community. United Way's mission is being a voice for those in need. We know that there are so many underlying aspects of poverty which are hard to see and equally hard to discuss and solve. And certainly systemic racism is a main contributor to generational poverty that has afflicted our community for far too long. Not one organization can solve inequity, and I am humbled to be only a small part of a group of esteemed community leaders from whom you will have the privilege to hear in this series.
For 108 years, the Cleveland branch of the NAACP has worked to improve the political, educational, social, and economic status of minority groups, to eliminate racial prejudice, and to keep the public aware of the adverse effects of racial discrimination, and to take lawful action to secure its elimination. This community conversation and the monthly topics we will address related to the Cleveland Consent Decree are right in line with the work our organization has addressed and championed every day for over a century right here in Cleveland. Through this series, you will hear about the current status of the Cleveland Consent Decree and the future of policing in the city. And as the name of this event suggests, this is a two-way dialogue, and we want to hear from you tonight and every month in this series as we tackle these various topics.
I'd like to thank Cuyahoga Community College and Rockwell Automation for sponsoring and making this series possible. I would also like to thank the City Club of Cleveland for partnering with us in hosting the series of events, and WOVU for simulcasting this evening's discussion live on 95.9 FM. We'd also like to thank all of our community partners.
Good evening. My name is Danielle Sidnor, and tonight's topic is the Cleveland Community Police Commission and citizens' involvement. The consent decree mandates that the Cleveland Division of Police will create formal and informal mechanisms that facilitate ongoing communication between CDP and the many Cleveland communities that it serves. The Cleveland Community Police Commission is composed of 13 members that represent the many and diverse communities in Cleveland. The Cleveland Community Police Commission makes recommendations to the Chief of Police and the City of Cleveland on policies and practices related to community and problem-oriented policing, bias-free policing, and police transparency. The consent decree recognizes the importance of community input into the way that police services are delivered, ongoing community input into the development of reforms, the establishment of police priorities, and mechanisms to promote community confidence in the Cleveland Division of Police. We understand this will strengthen the Division of Police and the police community relationships that are necessary to promote public safety. Tonight's conversation will review what has been done to accomplish this objective and what work still remains to build trust within the community. Tonight's moderator is David Abbott. In 2003, Dave became the president of the George Gund Foundation, which is a private nonprofit institution with the sole purpose of contributing to human well-being and the progress of society. Prior to joining the foundation, Dave served as the president of University Circle Incorporated, executive director of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum, and executive director of the Cleveland Bicentennial Commission. Dave was also the Cuyahoga County Administrator and early in his career, a reporter for the Plain Dealer. I am honored to introduce tonight's conversation moderator, Dave Abbott.
Cleveland and to the Cleveland branch of the NAACP for organizing these discussions. You're doing a great service to the community by having done so. I also want to thank the City Club of Cleveland for hosting this series of events and to WOVU for simulcasting this evening's discussion live on 95.9 FM. And WOIO Channel 19 and WKYC Channel 3 are also live streaming this discussion tonight. And so that everybody understands how we'll interact as a community as we have this talk tonight, let me talk a little bit about ground rules. There will be a public question and answer segment at approximately 7 p.m. when questions from the community will be heard and shared with our panel. You can start asking your questions at any time during this evening's program, and we'll make every effort to get them answered as we go. And you should text your questions to 216-307-5632. That's 216-307-5632. We'd appreciate it if your questions would be respectful and help to advance the dialogue. Now let me introduce our panel of experts so that you'll know who you'll be talking to. First, we have Jason Goodrick, the Executive Director of the Cleveland Community Police Commission. He began his career in public safety in 1998 as an emergency medical technician with a small volunteer fire department, but he progressed quickly to a full-time firefighter while moonlighting as a police officer. So he has a broad range of experience as background. Latoya Logan is the founder and CEO of Project Lift Services, an advocacy agency that builds resilience among Black teens and fathers and empowers them to be transformative members of society. She has served on the Cleveland Community Police Commission since 2016, chairing the Accountability Committee, which focuses on evaluating the police reform process. Next is Charles C. Charles has more than 50 years of experience in Cleveland, building community partnerships and bringing together diverse groups with divergent social, political, and cultural views. As a longtime executive director of the Community Reentry Program at Lutheran Metropolitan Ministry, Charles managed the implementation of 16 programs designed to assist formerly incarcerated individuals and at-risk youth. Gary Singletary is also with us tonight. Gary is a graduate of the Ohio State College of Law and has served as chief counsel for the city of Cleveland since 2014. As chief counsel, he assisted in negotiating the settlement agreement reached with the Department of Justice in 2015 that formed the basis for the current federal consent decree. And finally, from the United States Attorney's Office, we have Michelle Heyer. Michelle has been an assistant U.S. attorney since 2003. She focuses on civil rights enforcement, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, and constitutional policing. Prior to that, she was a trial attorney in the Department of Justice's Office of Special Investigations, where she received the Assistant Attorney General's Award for Human Rights Law Enforcement for her work on the denaturalization and deportation of Nazi death camp guard John Demjanjuk. Tonight, Alicia Ellis will be present to help moderate the community questions. Ms. Ellis is the founder and creator of the multimedia platform Maz Larray. She is also the co-founder of the women's empowerment group, Fierce Women on Board. So welcome panelists, welcome all of our viewers. Thank you for taking your time to be with us tonight, and thank you to the panel for lending their expertise to this dialogue. I want to say a few quick words of context for this discussion. As Danielle mentioned, the program is entitled the Cleveland Community Police Commission and Citizen Involvement. What wasn't known at the time that this panel was put together as part of this series of discussions was that a group of citizens would launch an initiative petition to put an issue before Cleveland's voters this November that would dramatically change the Community Police Commission. Among the many components of the ballot issue, it would, if approved, transform the commission from a body that advises on policing policy to a body that would have real powers, including, among others, the final say on discipline. Tonight's discussion is not a debate on the pros and cons of the ballot issue, although I certainly hope such events will occur before November 2nd. But here is what I would like to ask of our viewers tonight, especially those of you who live in the city of Cleveland. Listen carefully to what you hear about the work of the Community Police Commission as it currently exists. Ask yourself how you rate that work, especially within the overall context of the consent decree. Then inform yourself about the ballot issue. It contains much more than the very cursory observation I have just made about it. And I hope that tonight's discussion will contribute to your being able to cast an informed vote in November. So let's get to it. Jason Goodrick, you heard Danielle's brief summary of what the Community Police Commission is, but could you give us a little more context, a little more background, a little more explanation of what the commission is and how it works?
Sure. I think that's something in my wheelhouse since, so I joined in 2017, and the commission had already had a few years of work since 2015 in developing itself and becoming an organization. So just so we're aware here, first thing I will do is say, there's a lot of thank yous that are due, to all the organizations that put this together, but I really want to thank the commission volunteers who made this happen and gotten us this far, as well as thanking the community who has brought us to this point. As you mentioned, the citizen referendum, I think that really shows how far we've come from a rocky start to this commission, as some would say, all the way to full support of a ballot initiative is quite a journey. So, when it comes to this commission, there's lots of different viewpoints on what it is and what it should do. But at the end of the day, I think what we do is we collectively leverage the brain power of Cleveland to try and help the police be the best they can be. That's the way I really want to describe it. Initially it was, prescriptive by the consent decree. So the consent decree in the initial years laid out a very intense timeline of policy that needs to be revised. The commission's job would be to go and get as much feedback from the community on that policy and tapping into the community's voice, bring those recommendations forward to the city officials and the chief of police and say, hey, this is what the experts on the commission feel. It should be like, advocating for the best parts of all that collective of the community. And so for the several years, that was how it was dictated. And as we've moved into the current iteration of the commission, there's a little more time to just revise those policies, to think about where we're going in the future. But I still think we operate similar to a think tank. We are presented with a policy problem or something that the community brings us and says, hey, we'd like to see some improvement in this. Then we reach out to, the broad community and the many different communities in Cleveland as we can, through all the outreach effort that we can. And sometimes if it's a really specific problem, like search and seizure, for instance, what we'll do is we'll put the best experts we can find to volunteer their time and supplement the volunteer time of the commissioners. So, in that instance, law schools, deans of law schools, other experts in law for something that is very niche like that. When you're talking about search and seizure, you want that kind of expertise. And that would be something that a corporation would pay big dollars for in the private industry, right? To put that much collective brain power on an issue. But Cleveland is a wonderful place, and the commission has learned to bring forward that power to help make the police better. So I think, to sum it up, that's kind of what the commission has done as much as an advocacy. So, it's putting brains on to come up with really good solutions and the best knowledge we can collectively from all of Cleveland. And then, looking at how that's working over time at this point. So the big part is, as we move into the next iteration, it's really the commission is a second set of eyes. We were called a watchdog by Cleveland.com the other day. Well, I appreciate the compliment. you know, I think we're a long way from having a watchdog here, truly, because it's about getting that information and having a set of eyes on it. Right now, the monitoring team does that for us here in Cleveland. But as we move to the future, I think it's a great place for the commission to focus, is kind of do some of that work, you know, the auditing of the data, the looking how these policies are progressing, kind of along those lines. So.
Thank you for that. Let's do a little background on it. Michelle Heyer, why was the Police Commission created in the formation of the consent decree? Is, in your work for the Justice Department, is this standard with consent decrees around the country? Or was it done here in some unique way? And how does it fit within the overall consent decree?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And thank you to the United Way and the NAACP for organizing this forum and for inviting us to participate in it tonight. So consent decrees, by their nature, are specifically tailored to address the issues that gave rise to the need for a consent decree in the first place. So in some jurisdictions, there has been the creation of similar community organizations like the Cleveland Community Police Commission. So for example, Seattle's consent decree created a police commission there. You know, with respect to Cleveland, in our investigation, we found specifically that the Cleveland Division of Police's inadequate community engagement was a factor leading to the constitutional violations that we found, and that led to the need for a consent decree. So a very important goal and a very fundamental goal of the consent decree here in Cleveland was to improve the relationship between the Cleveland Division of Police and the communities that it serves. So really all the way through the consent decree, every provision in the consent decree is founded on the goal of increasing community engagement by CDP. And, you know, it's an essential goal is to transform CDP's philosophy of policing to one that's premised on community engagement, community-oriented policing and problem-oriented policing. So the creation of the Community Police Commission was one of the ways that we sought to bring community voices into the way that CDP was going to be reformed, and on an ongoing basis, the way that it was going to engage in policing. So really, we designed the CPC to do that, to basically amplify the voice of the community. The consent decree describes the role of the CPC as leveraging the experience and expertise of the people of Cleveland to ensure that CDP recognizes and operates in a manner consistent with cooperative community understanding and engagement. And so, the consent decree sets forth some specific ways for the police commission to do that. And Jason mentioned some of them. I think a lot of those were front loaded at the beginning of the process. And now that we are further along in the reform process under the consent decree, the CPC's broader, more general mandate of being the voice of the community in the reform process is really coming to the forefront.
Thank you. Gary Singletary, you helped negotiate the consent decree. What was the police commission's role in helping to shape that from the city's point of view? Was it seen as an important part of the consent decree negotiations? Was the city also an advocate for it?
Well, yes, the negotiations on the police commission were an important part of our interactions with the Department of Justice during the time that the settlement agreement, which forms the basis of the court's order, which is now known as the consent decree. I think Michelle might be the only one that's left working on this that we actually negotiated with back at the time. As with any kind of matters, you have a lot of turnover, and so Michelle has a good history on the negotiations and working with her. But the commission, it was a suggestion brought by the Department of Justice. It was part of what they included in a sort of an initial negotiating package that we then went through for some extended time in terms of trying to refine the settlement agreement to an agreement that both sides found acceptable, and the court would find acceptable, and it would accomplish what was intended for the community and citizens of Cleveland. So the city views the commission as a voice of the community, a voice that works with the police. They have some enumerated roles in the consent decree itself, dealing with assisting in certain policies, making recommendations. They're a voice. They have public meetings with the community. They report to the community and the city. And so it was an interesting start. There's been now 2 iterations of the police commission. The commission is appointed for a 4-year period. And I can remember back when we had negotiated this, as I recall, we made a lot of stops within the community itself, trying to discuss what the commission was there to do. I know Michelle was involved in some of that. We would have meetings in different areas of the city to tell the community what the commission was, who might want to serve on it, what just the responsibilities that would be there. And part of my early role in that regard, beyond just transmitting the message to the community, was working with what's called a selection panel. A selection panel is also established, the basis of one in the consent decree. And then what we did was the selection panel was appointed, and then application process was initiated. And I believe there were almost close to 200 applications for that first go round. And it boiled down to the commission made, the selection panel made 10. There are 10 civilian commissioners who the selection panel appoints, or it doesn't appoint, it recommends for appointment to the mayor. And then there are 3 individuals who serve on the commission who are through the police associations, including the Black Shield, the FOP, and the CPPA, the Patrolmen's Union. And so those 13 members make up the commission. There's been turnover over the years. There was no staff initially when the commission came into being. Jason's the most recent executive director for the commission. And so, there were times when, defining how we interrelated with the commission, there's still times where those issues arise, and we try to always think of one thing, and that's the reforms that are in the consent decree. A lot of work has been put into those, and a lot of work has been undertaken with the commission. And so we viewed the commission as being an important voice for interacting and coordinating with the community and having the community directly discussing with us. I would say one thing, even before the commission though, the city back in the 40s was, if not the first, one of the early cities to have what's called a community relations board. And so the commission sort of, I know in the consent decree it works or is designed to work with the community relations board and district policing committees, which there's a committee in each of the 5 police districts that give the citizens of each one of those districts an opportunity to interact with the police, make their voice known. And also one of the goals with the commission and the committees was that on a yearly basis, each of the committees would come up with what they thought were their ideas for what was important police-wise within each of those districts. They would present those to the commission, and then the police would be in a position of responding in that regard also. So, it's an evolving, developing role that we've had, as you can imagine, given relatively short period of time that the commission's been in existence, that the consent decree's been in existence, but there's been a lot of work done. I mean, I'm sure Jason will address a lot of the reports that the commission has done, providing recommendations to the police. We've sat down, met with them. We meet with them at least once a month with the DOJ and the monitor. So there's a lot of interaction, a lot of ideas, and we try to make the best of all of it.
So how big a deal was the creation of the police commission within the overall context of negotiating the consent decree? Was it like a quick decision made one day, or was it, one of the tougher issues? It sounds like it wasn't a very tough issue given the city's history, and you had a lot of other issues to deal with. I mean, the consent decree is a huge, complicated document, and deals with a lot of tough issues.
Well, the commission, it wasn't the primary focus. The overall reforms and addressing the issues that the city and DOJ, by way of an agreed upon letter prior to the initiation of the settlement agreement discussions. It was always recognized that the voice of the community was going to be an important part of the police agreed upon reforms, keeping the community advised, having a voice of the community directly involved on those reforms. And so there was a lot of discussion on how to set up the commission, because there's no template for it within the city structure. You have volunteer commissioners. There was going to be a staff who are city employees. And so there was, just discussing, how the selection process, the appointment of the commissioners, who they would interact with. It was something that it wasn't just a simple negotiation, but it was not. It was a negotiation that went to how can we accomplish this within the structure of Cleveland's government right now? And so there was, a lot of discussion on, if you look at the consent decree, paragraphs, 15 starts off talking about why they're being put into place. Paragraph 17 gives a lot, and 18 sort of lay out the foundation of what they're to accomplish. And so, how there's a lot of, what would I say, there's a lot of detail within some very short paragraphs, and that was the negotiation of, the commission was not set up as an oversight agency, as Jason indicated, with direct authority over the police. It's an agency that would review what the police is doing, comment on with the community on it, but it was not set up as a direct oversight with authority over the police. So working out that relationship so that it's understood and that the language of the consent decree would make sense to everyone who reads it, and that it would accomplish the goals that the DOJ had in mind when they first started negotiating with us, and that it met what we wanted also with regards to a community voice. So it was it was complicated, but it was something that both sides.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah, it was.
Jason, why don't you tell us who all the members of the commission are for the benefit of our audience?
We have 13 members at the time being, and each of them represents, as was mentioned, what they try to do is cover a broad group, and I think Danielle covered those. But David, if you would allow me to defer, we have a commissioner here with us, Ms. Latoya Logan, and I think she could really speak on, that perspective best about what it's like to be a commissioner and the calling of it and who the commissioners are, rather than myself, if you wouldn't mind me deferring that to give her an opportunity to speak from that perspective.
And Latoya, I would be interested in hearing your reason for why you wanted to be on it. Back when the call went out, why did you raise your hand?
Thank you, Jason, for that. I also want to thank all the community members who are attending, and of course, all the community volunteers who have stuck with this process over the years. dedicating countless hours to this process. As a community member, as a business owner, as a social worker, as a person who serves a population who often comes into contact with police, the call to get involved was no call at all. It was service. It is a requirement for what we do. I think that if you ask most individuals who have given time to this process, they would say the consent decree was created to address a long history of police abuse within the city of Cleveland and throughout the nation that not only led to the over-policing of Black and brown communities, police misconduct, improper arrest, deaths of more than 87 members of families within the city of Cleveland, including Craig Biggerstaff, Melissa Williams, Timothy Russell, Thomas Yatso, Desmond Franklin, and we could go on. So when you hear something like that, if it doesn't call you, if it doesn't pull you, if it doesn't let you know that this isn't an employment issue, this isn't a crime issue, this isn't an addiction issue, this is an issue of not addressing what community members actually are looking forward to. When I think about police reform here, I'm thinking about how oftentimes we're quoting people who have had positive interactions with police, which I think is great. But we don't have a consent decree because of positive interactions with police. We have a consent decree because there are far too many individuals who have unfortunately suffered at the hands of police misconduct. And until police reform is equitable across all zip codes within the city of Cleveland, then we haven't met any of our goals. So for me, as a person who volunteers my time freely and willingly, this is something that you just do. This is about social justice.
Great. I do want to remind our audience that if you have questions, you can text them to 216-307-5632. And we will be getting to them in about 25 minutes or so. Charles C., you're a member of the Cleveland Police Monitoring Team, which oversees the entire consent decree. What's your perspective on the CPC, the Police Commission, and its role as a part of that overall work?
Good evening to the listening audience, and special thanks to NAACP and United Way for putting together this most vital community conversation. And David, before I answer your question, I want to offer a word on behalf of this community to you, whom I understand you're retiring at the end of the year, for the indelible mark of care and compassion and civic responsibility that you have shared with this community. We thank you so much for your service, David.
Well, thank you, Charles.
Certainly. Now, the commission, as has been, I think, so eloquently said by the other folks who spoke about the commission, has been a robust and vigorous voice for community and provided community involvement. It has a number of work groups where folks from the community who are interested can come and be involved. It works very, very, very closely, as has already been pointed out, with the police department, making recommendations to them regarding policy, practices, and procedures. It gives, it also acts as advocate on behalf of community concerns. So it has been, I think, as it was established to be in the consent decree, that vehicle through which the community could participate in the reform process. And I think the commission has done that rather commendably.
Great. LaToya Logan, if I can come back to you for a second. You mentioned how important the public service mission of the commission is and how much it meant to you personally. I'd like to turn the conversation to what the commission has accomplished. And I'm interested in your view of what you're the proudest of in the police commission's work thus far.
Thank you. I'm not sure I can answer that question about being proud, because I'm not exactly sure this work elicits a feeling of pride. I think it's more about progress and where do I think we've made the most progress. I think we've made some really good suggestions in terms of policy recommendations and training. The search and seizure policy headed by Gordon Freeman, who's a commissioner, is exceptional, and Lou Katz, who's our chair of the commission. They did an excellent job, and all of the community members who participated on that process. Bias-free policing, I think specifically with attention to the LGBTQ+ community, is a great win that still needs to go a little further. I would say that we've done a lot of great work in terms of trying to move forward the training process. I think there's still much to do, but we've offered some really great recommendations, evaluations of the current training policies, and how to improve evaluation so that we see those practices implemented effectively and efficiently within the community. I also say we've done a great job of lifting the community voices. For 13 people to serve on a commission, we all come with our own perspective. Part of the reason we have been selected is because we have our own reach into the community where we've been serving for years. And when you bring that together, it's very easy to sometimes want to prioritize your needs. But as a commission, we've done a really great job of prioritizing the community's voice, wherever that might take us, whether it is believed to be within our purview or not. Part of representing the community is to evolve with the community and to not stay stagnant because we have a black and white document. So I think where we've excelled the most, where I think the progress has been the greatest, is ensuring the community that when they say something to us, we are listening, we are incorporating it, and we are passing on those recommendations.
If you were to imagine the work of the commission and of the larger consent decree as a kind of race or a journey, how far along are we in your view? Are we still at the beginning? Are we getting close to halfway, beyond? Where do you think we are?
Well, I think the problem with the consent decree is that we see it as a journey, that there's an endpoint to it, and that would be wrong. The consent decree is a foundation to which we should build a continuous and a living reform process that every single year, every 2 years, we should be evaluating whether or not we are effective, whether or not we need to update what we're doing in order to align with what would be best practices for community problem-oriented policing. We also should consider that transparency and accountability doesn't just happen one time. This is something that continues to evolve, continues to ebb and flow with whatever is happening with the city. I mean, at the end of the day, the consent decree is supposed to respond to the needs of the city, not the needs of policy updates. So if I were to use a continuum, I would say we are at the very beginning, because we still do not have leadership that understands that this is not a final fix, that this is supposed to be an innovative process that builds trust, accountability, and transparency with the community.
And when you say you feel we're still at the beginning, in whatever metaphor we choose, is that in terms of just the number of policies that have been assessed and recommended? Is it in terms of this critical issue of trust and where we are in terms of, and compared to where we need to go, that we're still only at the beginning of rebuilding that trust?
I would say it's a combination of three things. The first thing is leadership. You have to have people in positions of power who believe that the consent decree is the floor, meaning if we just hit what's expected of us in the consent decree, we really haven't done that great. We're just meeting what we've been asked to do. The second thing is that we have to build on community trust. Whether you think that crime is a problem because people are terrible or not is really irrelevant. When we have Black and brown communities that are over-policed and we still can't solve homicides, and clearly there's a disconnect between civilians and policing and how we can actually work to keep our communities safer. And finally, the evaluation process is nowhere near where it should be. We're not collecting the data we need to, we're not synthesizing that data, and we're not utilizing that data to really go back and evaluate policies that were developed and enacted in 2016 or 2017 are still relevant and appropriate for today's policing. So at the crux of it all is we need people in power who understand that police reform is a living process.
Thank you. I would be interested in others' views. Yes, on this topic, go ahead.
You know, I was just saying, while I certainly agree with much of what Commissioner Logan has said, I would think, having been with the monitoring team from its inception, and this is its 6th year, I would think that I would say that some progress has been made when you take a look at some of the newer policies, particularly take a look at the use of force. Take a look at, as she pointed out, the extremely great work that the commission did around search and seizure, the crisis intervention team, and the work that the city has done around training officers to be involved into response, and the enormous number of volunteers that associated with the Adams Board that put together the Mental Health Advisory Committee. So while Commissioner Logan, I think, makes a good point that there is certainly a lot more to be done, I think that over the last 5 years, some significant changes have been made and some things have been done. And as we move into compliance, we'll certainly have to take a look at to see, on one hand, you've got policy on it, so it's kind of easy to write down something on paper that says this is what needs to be done. But then there is a compliance period where the monitoring team will be taking a look at if those activities that were listed in the policy are being followed through, and if in fact they are acting consistent with what the policy said, that they should be doing. So long way to go. I concur, but I think that we've come a significant way since the inception 5 years ago.
I want to hear from others on this, but I do want to remind the audience that if you have questions, please text them to 216-307-5632. 216-307-5632. Michelle Heyer, does the U.S. Attorney's Office have an opinion on the accomplishments of the Community Police Commission and whether it's very far along the road?
Well, I think the Community Police Commission itself has, made a lot of tremendous accomplishments. They are all volunteers, and the volume of work that they do is really just, it's beyond impressive. I mean, they have all devoted so much energy to helping this process along. But I think you need to look at the larger question of how far the consent decree is along. And then obviously the police commission is a huge part of getting us to where we are. And I would agree with both LaToya and Charles that there has been a lot of progress. We've revised so many of CDP's policies and practices. And at the same time, the goal of the consent decree is to change the way that CDP polices, at a very fundamental level. And that's something that is a work in progress. And it's something that, even when the consent decree is finished, when CDP has come into full compliance with the concrete provisions of the consent decree, it will still be a work in progress, because we've tried to set up the police department to, be able to pull itself along and constantly stay abreast of, what are the current policing practices? What are the needs and wants of the community that CDP serves? So, I think we have made a lot of progress, and I think there's still a lot left to accomplish.
Gary, go ahead.
Just jump in here. Also, the city, we believe there's been, as Michelle indicated, a lot of progress made. And going to LaToya's point about the consent decree, or at least the objectives of it never ending, well, there's two things. One, there is a formal consent decree that's in front of Judge Oliver, and that's a different, that's a real kind of matter that exists. And what Michelle was indicating, and what I think the city's thoughts on this also are, that we don't view the consent decree as just something to get through and then forget all about it. What the consent decree is doing, and we think we've made a lot of progress, just, like Michelle indicated, and I think LaToya also, a lot of the policies are in place now that have been, they've been looked at by the commission, they've been looked at by the DOJ, they've been looked at by the monitor. They've been, every policy that's been approved through the police or through the consent decree does not go into effect until after a motion has been filed, or a notice with Judge Oliver, who then reviews what the monitor says the city has accomplished in coming up with the policy. And then he issues an order. And there's been a couple times when maybe there was a little more that he or the monitor or the DOJ wanted to see. from what was, a policy is agreed to, and then it's reviewed, and then maybe there's a couple tweaks that need to be done. And so that continues also. But I think, some of the more important things, the CIT, the crisis intervention, and the training goes along with that. And the officers who are now CIT qualified are going to make a big difference in the community with respect to calls that are maybe not related to crime or something, but they're more something LaToya would probably be more familiar with, a social call. And maybe there's someone in crisis, a mental health problem or something along those lines, where you're going to have officers now who are going to be delegated to go to that kind of a call. And they're going to have training. And we think that's an important part going forward of working with the community. But another thing is there's been a lot of purchase of equipment, and why is that important to community policing? Because what the additional equipment allows is more real-time reporting and information taking by the police. It used to be years ago that the police would write their reports after they came back from being out on the beat. And then those reports would be handwritten, and then they would be transcribed. Now with the new computers and software that have been adopted, those are done in real time. And what difference that makes is that there's more of a direct interaction, moment to moment review of what's going on. Coming down the road is going to be what Michelle, I believe, indicated also is data. And it's going to be, I think, what the data is going to do is part of the consent decree sort of phased in. First of all, you agree to it, then you set up like the commission and the roles different organizations, agencies have. And then we got into policies, looking at equipment, looking at personnel issues. And so those have flowed along. And as the phase we're going into now, with the policy set in place, is a review of whether the police are actually carrying out, and there's metrics that are set up in the consent decree that are going to be used to measure this. And over the last few years, we've got a data management team within the police department now, working directly with software providers and the community and others to set up a system that the data can be made available and it's transparent. Use of force data has been provided over the last couple of years, and it's been very detailed. And it's a public document. It's accessible on the city's website. And so, notwithstanding that we're going to get out of this consent decree at some point, sometime fairly soon in the future, I would guess, relatively speaking. But that doesn't end what the consent decree was framed to do, which is to ensure the reforms that lead to a better relationship between the police and the community being served. And I think we've made great strides in that regard.
Yeah, and David, if I might, and one of the things I want to emphasize about the end of the consent decree, that the consent decree cannot end until the monitor and the DOJ certifies that the police department is in compliance with the policies that they set forth. So there's a 2-year compliance period. And as I said earlier, people can write policy and they can write out anything. We all know what to say, but you got a 2-year compliance period where the monitoring team will be taking a vigorous, robust look at compliance with those policies. And the monitor will have to sign off and say, this was a good policy. These practices over the last 2 years substantiate that they are complying with this policy. No compliance, no end of consent decree. And I want the public to understand that. It's just not a period of time when you say, well, it's 6 years and that's it. The police department must comply with the policies as they are so stated. And I want the public to be very clear about that. Thank you.
A very important point. Jason, did you want to add anything to the list of accomplishments from your perspective?
There's a lot of expertise that I have here, but I really think if we have community questions, I'd rather field those, as they come in. I know you might see them, David. There's a lot spinning in my head, but I don't want to cut into the community's time.
Well, we're not quite to the planned time for that.
Then I will say this. Charles makes a great point about compliance. So I want to bring it back to the community and the commission here. One of the places we're not in compliance that the monitor has observed and written down is community, working with the community and listening to the community, right? And that's the core function of, so this can't end until there is a greater, 6 years into this thing, we're still having difficulty hearing what people are saying. When it's directed towards the police department, there's still an extreme resistance to say, we got these great policies, so thank you. We don't need your input anymore, or something along those lines. It plays itself out that way. And let me just say about consent decrees too, they're a double-edged sword. They cost a lot of money, and there's a lot of great things that come out of them, but backsliding is a huge problem. And one of the things we know, see, I'm an evidence-based guy. This wasn't in my bio, but I went to Case, and I have kind of their business school where I would do business consulting, right? So I have this organizational consulting background and a master's degree in it. And one of the things that we have to be wary of is too much change too quickly, right? And then people forgetting why we did that change and entering into the backslide. So we love that the monitoring team's here. We love that the DOJ is here helping us get this change started, but you don't have to look far to see the evidence, and evidence is important. You can look at other cities, and this was just in the news here. So what we know about essentiality of ending a consent decree is you have to have some form of civilian oversight in place. It has to happen if you want those things to stick long-term. Okay, research by Jeffrey Alpert and Joshua Channon, who have examined past consent decrees in New Orleans, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Washington, DC, and Los Angeles. All people who have been ahead of us have shown that if the community is disengaged by the administration afterwards, and there's no oversight with community members into what was changed that occurred, you're going to backslide. You can just look to Bloomberg News in September. They just did a big piece, and this is in right now, writing about how far Cincinnati, which was the model that was held up, right? The collaborative there was the model of community involvement. It was a little bit different than a consent decree. They had this joint conglomerate of all these community organizations who were at the table with the police department. And after the DOJ and the monitoring team left town, it didn't take long for that to fall apart because the right structure wasn't in place to continue it. And the will wasn't there to continue it. And right now I feel the will to continue that in the current administration just isn't there. If they wanted it done, they could have already waved the wand, made the legislation happen to ensure that there's not going to be backslide as we move forward. So it's something to be considered, that it's very well documented. And although oversight is not the panacea, it's not going to fix everything, but we don't have any insurance policy right now when this ends that all that investment in time and energy and community involvement is going to stay. It's just not there.
Let me jump in with a recent example and get your and other reactions to it. That just last Friday, Judge Oliver ruled that the city had to turn over data requests, discipline records that had been requested for quite some time by the commission. And the monitor, the independent monitor of the consent decree, described it, this dispute as a long-standing and seemingly unrelenting divide. Now, what does the judge's ruling signify? Does it signify a different era in that relationship going forward? Or does it, or the fact that he had to make a ruling signify that this is a divide that has not been resolved, and therefore, to your point, may lead to backsliding once the consent decree is finished? Anybody can jump in on this one.
Well, since I wrote the city's point of view in that particular recent dispute, I suppose I can jump in. First of all, there's no evidence of backsliding. Jason pointing out and arguing, I guess, for civilian oversight. I'm not quite sure what he intends by that because there is a civilian oversight structure. We're about to have a mayor's race with The mayoral candidates have each commented on how they view police reform and what's important with regards to them going forward. With regards to the informational, you know, as you might guess, there's been rough edges between the police, the city, myself included, and the police commission and the DOJ for that matter, with regards to exactly the role of the police commission as far as informational requests. What is their mandate? And, you know, as I indicated earlier, and I implied in Jason's response, is that the commission is not created as an oversight function now. And so at times it appears that the commission is attempting to grade the police in real time, as opposed to the consent decree, the role of the monitor and the work with the DOJ in that respect. We've worked often with the commission on any number of issues. And as I'm sure Jason would recognize, you know, personally, I send him a lot of information, things that are filed, things that arbitration results involving discipline, and we discuss different matters. What the court did and what the DOJ with their motion had suggested was to come up with a framework for these kind of disputes going forward. And so there's going to be a structure now that before, sometimes, as you might expect, the consent decree involves, it's like a 360 degree. There's an angle going every direction because there was a lot to be done. You know, if you look at the consent decree, it's what, 400 plus paragraphs. And so there's any number of things in motion at any one time. It's not like people just sit down and think of one thing going forward. And sometimes the requests and the judge references that he would hope the CPC looks at the requests they're making, that they don't attempt to overburden the police and they stay within the authority that they're provided in the consent decree. So at times that's an issue, we discuss it. And in this particular instance, there were several requests, especially dealing with discipline issues that have been going on for some number of years without resolution. It wasn't just like with regards to discipline letters that the city was refusing to turn them over. We didn't think they were something that the commission necessarily had to have going back 7 years to be able to monitor the progress being made by the police discipline-wise right now, which is being monitored in real time with reports issued by the monitor because of the burdensome nature of locating all such reports. So,
Gary, I want to give Michelle a chance to, since she was on the other side of the case from you, and we're going to have to get to the community questions in a second.
Oh, sure, no problem.
Michelle, do you have a point of view you want to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I will just say that I think that the dispute that went before the court was about some specific documents and types of information that the CPC had requested. We were not seeking to give them 7 years of discipline records, but it was really only just a couple of years, and to give them access to those discipline letters, which are public records going forward. But I think that, you know, as Gary noted, there have been a number of disputes about what information the city will give to the CPC, and that it was really premised on a larger disagreement over the role of the CPC, you know, and I think that the court resolved that, you know, in its ruling. The court agreed with the Department of Justice that the CPC does have a broad role in the consent decree implementation and the police reform process. And as Gary noted, I think, you know, the most important thing that the court did is to set up a mechanism to resolve these disputes quickly and efficiently, you know, going forward, so that we won't be dragging it out like some of these disagreements have been.
Okay. Alicia Ellis, are you with us to provide community questions? What has come in?
Yes, Dave, thanks again for everyone joining us with questions. We have a lot of community questions coming in, so this is great. Here's one question we have. On a scale of 1 to 10, what percentage of the consent decree that's considered to be completed? 10%, 30%, 70%?
Charles, do you want to take a crack at that if you can, or perhaps Michelle or Gary?
Yeah, I would defer to Michelle.
Thanks, Charles. You know, I think we talked about this before. You really can't quantify it like that. You know, there are some things in the consent decree that were very easy and quick to accomplish. You know, one of the first things that happened was for CDP to rewrite its mission statement. You know, they did that. That was easy. Other things are, you know, basically changing their entire approach to policing. And that's not something that is going to happen quickly or easily. So if you just, you know, went through and put a check mark next to every paragraph that's been finished, even if, you know, 3/4 of them were checked off, that doesn't mean that we're 3/4 of the way to completing the reform process that's contemplated by the consent decree. So, you know, it's disappointing, but I can't give a specific number on that. You know, I think as we said earlier, we've made a tremendous amount of progress and there's still a tremendous amount left to do.
And that reinforces LaToya Logan's point about this not being anything other than really an organic process that must continue indefinitely.
David, if I could just inject, I think quite a lot of progress has been made towards, especially in the primary focus areas of the consent decree. You know, the primary basis for the consent decree and the DOJ coming in and with their investigation back, I think it was 2014, was use of force. Was there an excessive use of force, you know, in the city of Cleveland? And use of force was one of the initial and primary focuses of the police going forward, because that is the bedrock issue that really implicated the DOJ's investigation. And, you know, you only have to look at the policies that were put into place, the training that has been done. You know, de-escalation was a very big element of our negotiations on the use of force, the kinds of force that could be used, how those uses of force were going to be investigated, breaking down by, you know, categories in the use of force. And so that took probably what, the first year and a half or so, with a pretty primary focus on that particular issue, because it was the biggest issue coming in. And so I think, like Michelle said, you probably can't put, you know, a numerical quantitative number on it right now, but a lot of progress, well over 50% has been made. And I think when the quantitative analysis is actually accomplished, and it's going to be done by the monitor, I think the community will be satisfied with what they see with regards to a lot of the data points and the issues of bias-free policing, the overuse of force. That's going to, you know, stopping people, the percentages of who's involved in those kinds of deals. I think the community is going to have a lot of confidence that a lot of progress has been made and will continue to do so going forward.
Okay.
And Gary, the monitoring team is in the process as we speak of putting together its 10th semi-annual report. And in that report, a lot of this discussion we're having now will be in the report about, you know, what's been done, what needs to be done still. So, and that report will be coming out very soon.
If I could take a minute, David, LaToya Logan does in fact have a question that she's posing to the community through a survey at this moment, which is live, which is getting the perspective of the community on if they feel things have changed since 2015 in their police encounters. And it has specific consent decree focus. So do they still feel like stops include bias? Do they feel like the training, and some of it is described, has changed, you know, in relation to the mandates from the consent decree? So I'm just going to take a minute and let people know that perspective is important, right? Because there's two things, although we're doing, you know, saying all of these technical things are being checked in the consent decree, the two things that are very important is, one, community trust, right? That's one in the preamble of the consent decree, but we don't really have a checkbox for that, right? So are we measuring that? So this survey helps kind of gauge that. And then, you know, community perception. We can say we have great policies that you know, included your input. We can say the DOJ and the monitoring team in the city are in agreement as the parties, that the consent decree has achieved most of its goals. but are we asking the community if they feel the difference? And that's what this a survey that was designed to do. So it's just a check-in with the community, and you can find that right on our homepage if you go there. It's clecpc.org, and fill that out, and that helps us. We're going to use that data to inform, the monitor, the DOJ, and the city on how the people feel on the streets, the progress, and if this training and policies are being felt there yet.
Is there a closing date for that survey by which, when the data will be tabulated?
Not right now, because we want to get a good sample. So we're going to keep going as hard as we can until we have we feel we have a good representative sample of the city that makes that survey valid.
Okay, good. Alicia, another question.
Yeah, so this is a two-part question here directed to the commission members regarding the ballot initiative. Do you think the CPC should play a more significant role with enforcement power? And are there any downsides to shifting disciplinary enforcement power from the chief of police?
Well, I don't know if we want to get into the details of that now, unless LaToya, unless you have an opinion on, your sort of role now.
I do.
You do?
I do.
Okay.
I think that the charter amendment, this ballot initiative, is reflective of the community's dissatisfaction with police reform, accountability, and transparency up until this point. And to dismiss it as, well, they just aren't paying attention or they're not understanding what's happening is just furthering the gap in relations and really promoting this lack of inclusion of the community within this process. If you have community members who have dedicated more than 2 years, walked to get signatures, invested their free time to develop this initiative because they don't agree with what's happening today, we have a responsibility to take notice of it, to understand it, and to hear them out, regardless of if you think it's our role or not. So that's first and foremost. Secondly, I think that the ballot initiative is trying to address an issue that we're seeing isn't being addressed currently. We have police officers who are engaged in police misconduct and criminal misconduct and are not being prosecuted for that. Literally 4 officers on duty with their badges driving a police patrol car are drinking at a bar, go to answer a call in the car, drive back to the bar and continue to drink. And all they do is get terminated. Whereas any of us would have gotten a DUI, driving, having a weapon under disability, and none of those things happen. So we can't say that we're moving and we're building trust when things like this are continuing to happen. The second thing I would say is that the ballot initiative is really trying to eliminate some of the issues we've seen when there has been a recommendation for discipline that the chief completely disagrees with and says, I'm not going to do that. There's a problem with that. If you are paying people to investigate and to render a decision, we should respect those decisions. Otherwise, why have them in place anyway? So I think this, again, is strengthening what's already in place and making sure that an individual's perspective isn't the final decision on police misconduct or discipline. It's very difficult to discipline people that you have a relationship with. And our chief has relationships with officers. So we know that there's going to be some issue with it just being unbiased and subjective in terms of how he makes those decisions. I don't think that that's devoid of anyone who is serving and working with people in a similar capacity. So I think the ballot initiative, the charter amendment, is something that I absolutely support. And I think that it's all about bringing the community, giving us a real voice in this process. Earlier, it was mentioned that the CPC is supposed to be an advisor to the CDP police reform, but an advisor is respected by those who they're advising. And I don't believe that has been the case since I've been a part of the CPC. So that definitely needs to change.
Gary, did you want to
say?
No,
we're not debating the charter amendment tonight. But I would say that the charter amendment, everyone in the audience should read it. It's 17 pages long. The police commission that's in today is not the police commission that will be there if this charter is enacted. There's no transition language in there with regards to transitioning the current police commission into this new police commission. There's an appointment process through the mayor and the city council. There's a lot of authority that is now going to, if the charter amendment was to be enacted, would flow to the 13 members of the new police commission, including discipline, including policies, including recruitment. You'd be given the police commission the authority to overrule the police review board, which is a charter-based disciplinary unit. So they have, I mean, there are issues within the charter amendment that are well beyond anything that the consent decree addresses. And the fact of the matter is that the commission would, once they're in place under the charter, would have a role that they're not playing now. And who those members would be, I don't know. There'd be mayoral appointments. And as far as some of the challenges to the language in the charter amendment, those are yet to be developed in terms of after the election, if it comes into place. So a lot of questions, and I respect, you know, people getting the signatures, putting it on the ballot. We'll let the citizens of Cleveland decide it, but hopefully the citizens of Cleveland will review the document and actually understand what is being placed before them vote-wise.
David, if I may just have one moment.
Sure.
I can't speak a lot on the ballot initiative because of my position, but what I will say is paragraph 17D gave the commission under the current consent decree the ability to look at the current oversight system. So I believe it reads, on an ongoing basis, review CDP's civilian oversight structure to determine if there are changes it recommends for improving CDP's accountability and transparency. That work was conducted in 2008, and the simple answer is yes. There's a lot to be desired in the civilian system that is currently in place here. Although the consent decree made progress in this area, the question that a lot of citizens ask is, what does it really do, right? It puts it puts some civilians in positions that either report to the chief of police or report to the chief of police's boss, right? And so is that really any structure that can make a difference? Does it have any power? So one of the things that we looked at was how these entities interact and where they go to. And we compared it with best practices. And what we know is you need independence. There's not independence right now because of that branch back to the executive or back to the chief. You need some diversity. That's gotten better with some of the reforms that we had with CPRB. You know, involvement in the community. Is it well funded? The answer is still no when you compare it to the budget of the police department. Is it empowered? No, we don't have the powers of subpoena that other boards have and things of that nature. Is it regarded? To Latoya's point, absolutely not. A lot of times it's met with coldness, you know, and in fact, you know, granted AOCity and ego about, you know, even when intelligent, educated people who are experts in the field bring it to the police say, we don't need your help. You know, is it even-handed and permanent? Permanency is a no. You know, two things, the Inspector General and the Police Commission can go away at the end of the consent decree, and those things will be gone forever if they're not decided. So the commission did do that work. It's on our website as well. You can look at the oversight section of our webpage under our work at the CLE CPC to get a better understanding of what the consent decree did for oversight. And it did do some good things, but did it go far enough in comparison? The work of the commission that was brought about by paragraph 17D said, no, there's still a lot to be desired when it comes to comparable other entities that truly have that.
You know, you know, if you do look at the consent or, you know, the charter amendment, you know, just one section of it, there's a few things in there that we're talking about the consent decree tonight. The charter amendment describes basically that the voters would be finding that the consent decree initiated so far is grossly insufficient. I definitely disagree with that particular statement, given all the work that has gone into the reforms that have been accomplished. We were just talking a minute ago about how we're 50% or more along the way. I believe we're well more than 50% along the way. But to the basis of the charter amendment is to turn basically the running of the police over to an unelected board that would have power over discipline, policy, recruiting, any number of things, including grants, including the executive director having contract authority, which the city has laws and ordinances dealing with now. So there's there's a lot to unpack in a 17-page charter amendment that, again, are there good points? Are there bad points? I'm not here to comment beyond pointing out what is in the charter amendment, and just say to the members of the public that have an interest in the charter amendment to read the entire document. And if you have questions, ask someone who can explain it to you.
And I think we should move on to another question, but I agree that this is an issue that everybody should be concerned about and aware of. And I hope that people do take the time to read the full 17-page document and inform themselves on it and make a smart decision and an informed decision in November. But let's hear another question.
Why should Clevelanders believe that the CPD can police itself and its behavior without significant oversight from citizens, since we've had 2 federal probes and we still are underneath a consent decree beyond its 5-year deadline?
Who would like to take a stab at that? I mean, everyone here is involved in that in some way or another. By your engagement, you must believe it's possible.
I think that it goes back to leadership. You know, Cleveland has a very important decision to make this year. Who's going to be the next mayor? Who determines who's the public safety director? Who determines who the chief of police is? Who determines who's working on this process? And so you have to think about, again, are you seeking innovation? Are you seeking to live in discomfort for a while in order to get to social justice? And I think that that's really the question. It isn't whether or not police reform can happen and if police can actually police themselves. It depends on who is the leader, who creates the culture of that division of police. And I think we've had historically in Cleveland, and we've seen that there has been some considerable deficits. And if you don't acknowledge that, that's not a win. You know, that doesn't serve anyone. To not acknowledge that those are still issues that we're dealing with today. If anything, it creates further mistrust. I think that it is important to have an external oversight. For myself and my profession, we have a code of ethics. There's a board outside of my employment that monitors my work. If somebody wants to file a grievance, there are real discipline, real consequences, real follow-up. And I think with police who can take a person's life in less than 27 seconds, we should have that in place. And for them to think that civilians are incompetent simply because they're civilians is, I think, definitely naive and maybe a little disrespectful because civilians are involved, engaged, intelligent, working and a part of this community and can offer great insight as to how we move forward and how we actually build trust.
Well, I also think that just the progress that's been made shows that the police have made great strides with regards to policing themselves, with regards to discipline issues and community engagement, crisis intervention. There is a civilian oversight structure now, and then it starts at the top with the mayor and the laws drafted by the city council. You know, there's an election coming up. People can look at how each of the candidates come out on this charter amendment and what they think in regards. No one's saying that civilians are incompetent or shouldn't be listened to. What they're saying is questioning this charter amendment with regards to whether it is the basis for accomplishing what LaToya is talking about. But again, the important thing is that anyone voting on this charter amendment should read it and understand what it says. I'm sure we would all agree with that.
Another question.
Yeah, this seems to be to the point of the panelists here. Obviously, we're in election season. Do we as a city have a better chance with obtaining change if we get a new police chief when we obviously roll in a new mayor here? If so, how?
I can speak a little on what we know about other cities, David, through research of the CPC, and our policy analysts. Going back to other cities and consent decrees, no city, to our knowledge that we've looked at, has had successful completion including that trust spectrum of the consent decree that hasn't changed leadership in the CDP. Cleveland decided to take a different path, which was promote and utilize current leadership who also were members or participatory management during the time the DOJ investigated and looked at things. So there's strong evidence that a change in leadership is necessary to really have good reform and build community trust. I remember my first days as the executive director, we would have march-in protests demanding changes in leadership from community members at our meetings who recognized that and didn't understand why leaders were promoted through the ranks that were, may or may not have been complicit in putting us in this situation to begin with. So that, I think, to Latoya's point, the community is sharper than people give it credit for, and they can see right through some things. And nobody at our meetings really understood that. And we heard that for several years, continuously, that question asked, why? And I don't think there was ever given an answer back to the community, but there's strong evidence to show that changing leadership and bringing in people who are not attached, right? Because there's an attachment to that culture. There's 30 years of working with these people, and now you're going to stand up and say, hey, I'm the guy that's going to change us, or the gal that's going to change us. It just doesn't seem to work in many places. So it is a good question. It's a valid question for the community to ask, and it's something to be considered. How leadership is important.
Well, I don't know exactly what evidence Jason's talking about with regards to our police chief and the command structure. There's been a lot of progress made. I think that's objective and quantifiable, and Charles commented as much. So to indicate that evidence suggests that the leadership has to change for this elements to go forward is based on nothing. I mean, it's not showing, there is no basis for that statement. I've worked with the police, I've worked with all elements in this consent decree going forward. And there's been a lot of hard work, a lot of hard, honest work to try to do the best that can be done for the citizens of Cleveland. Yes, we've had our issues with the police commission with regards to their role, the way they view our role. And the judge's latest ruling is one aspect of that. But that is how things work. You have a judge who looks at things, analyzes whether things are going in the right direction or not. And I think you only have to read, what is this coming up, Charles, the 10th or 11th semi-annual report. You can trace the progress through these, the monitor's reports over the years that we've been in existence with this. So to suggest that only a civilian oversight board coming in with total authority over what the police do is the only way that the police can continue to reform is just not a statement in Cleveland that's predicated in any fact whatsoever.
And Gary, I didn't say civilian oversight. I just want to be clear. I said broadly leadership, right? So and where I get that from is academic studies. So I don't have them in front of me, but I'll be happy to put them on our website to share those. That leadership is a factor in change here. And I just want to point out, there's lawsuits against all of this leadership pending in court right now, from the chief on down that show allegedly behavior that is exactly the kind of behavior that we're trying to stamp out with the consent decree. And I'm not saying they're guilty, because people can accuse anybody in a lawsuit, but they're there. So it shows the leadership of the division is important, because how do we bring on a new member of a department and say, please follow these values, and then they're able to go on and search public records and court documents, and there's high-level leadership, being allegedly, setting examples that are opposite of those values. So I just want to bring that point to you, that I was talking about leadership in general, right? How important leadership, setting the values are, and that's why a lot of cities choose to bring in other leadership, other places that where there's broader, don't have that same connection and may have higher levels of leadership training or whatever it may be, to bring that in and teach better leadership to the people who are here.
Well, new leadership is coming because of the election for mayor this year. And so it's another reason why this is an important discussion, not only with regard to the ballot issue that is on in November, but also the new mayor who will, in all likelihood, bring his or her own new team and therefore new leadership in the Department of Police. So another question, we're getting down toward the end. We probably have time for one more.
Yes, so why did it take an order from Judge Oliver to force the city to provide information requested by the commission?
Well, I'll address that initially because we've provided lots of information to the commission over the years of the consent decree. You know, some of the issues, again, go to how you want to interpret language that's in a consent decree, a settlement agreement document that we assisted in negotiating. There are areas we think that the police commission obviously has authority, and areas that the consent decree lays out that they are to accomplish this, that, or the other, and sometimes they need information to do that. And there's other times where we disagree with that particular role and think it's not part of their mandate. So it's not like the city just refuses to turn it over. As I said earlier, we have monthly meetings with the police commission, anyone on the commission that wants to show up, along with the DOJ and the monitor. And these are issues that are discussed. It's not like, you know, the city's just standing back, not turning something over. We explain our reasoning, why we're not doing it, the burden that's placed on us. And, you know, to an earlier point, just so it's understood, yes, the judge said give up discipline letters from 2019 going forward, but the commission has a long time insisted that it wants records going back to 2015. That's overburdensome. It's not accomplishing anything that we see that assists the community in understanding the reforms that are going forward. So yes, we do have disputes with them at times. We think they're all based in good faith. We argue it out. And when it comes down to a position like the DOJ took in front of Judge Oliver, we let the judge decide it. He's now come up with a way, as Michelle indicated, it gives us a structure so that where these have been informal discussions and talks over the last few years, now there's a structured short time window that will go forward on it and the judge will decide. Hopefully we're not going to have any that need judge deciding, because a lot of times we can come to a compromise, and we've done that often.
Well, thank you. I'm afraid we have to cut it off.
First, I just want to thank Michelle Hyder for bringing this to the judge. That's first and foremost. We have for years not gotten any movement from the city, and I think that it's not an accurate account of our dealings. We have been looking for documents since 2017, and I've been serving since 2016, so I know exactly how long this process has been. And those meetings that we have every single month, we stopped going for a period of time because we were not getting anywhere. In fact, we're often disrespected and dismissed in those meetings by the CDP and the city. So if we're gonna tell what's happening, we gotta tell the whole truth. I just encourage Clevelanders, everybody, if you're a community member, get involved. Endurance is the name of this game. So you have to stay invested, involved, and don't give up.
I would agree.
I can agree with that. Gary, I have to end it here. We're at our time, and I want to thank you all for joining us this evening, and I want to turn it over for our closing to Helen Forbes Fields.
Thank you, Dave, for moderating this discussion, a very robust discussion. And I want to thank all of our sponsors, Cuyahoga Community College and Rockwell Automation, as well as our many community partners for their support in bringing this important conversation to life. We also want to thank Cleveland City Club, WOVU 95.9 FM, WOIO, Cleveland 19 News, and WKYC Studios, who live streamed tonight's conversation. Ideal Stream will also air a replay of this conversation next week on The Sound of Ideas. Lastly, I want to thank each one of our panel participants and our community members for joining us on our mission to create a voice to encourage engagement, as well as advance understanding of the Cleveland Consent Decree and of one another. Our next panel discussion will be held on October 13th, and it will focus on youth and police. And we are partnering with Tri-C on this program. Finally, I extend a special invitation to all of our community members to join United Way of Greater Cleveland's annual community meeting, taking place this Friday, September 10th at 4 o'clock. The meeting will feature a documentary project called Decision Points. This film shares the story of a single mother, Samantha, who works tirelessly to support her children. The documentary follows the struggle of a Cleveland family forced to make tough decisions every day simply to make basic needs and stay above water. It will be enlightening and educational, and I hope you will be able to join us. Please join us by registering through our website at unitedwaycleveland.org, and registration is complimentary and open to all. Thanks once again to our moderator and to our panelists, and everyone, please have a wonderful evening. Good night.